So my name's Kevin Verre. I'm a software engineer. I'm going to talk about taking care of your tech career. Currently, I'm working at Apple. I also host this event in Silicon Valley called Wine and Hack. So we can talk about that because that's pretty fun. And then if you guys have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat or ask them over voice, or there's even like a raise and lower your hand on the Fiesta app website. And I didn't make like a slideshow or anything, but I took a few notes. And so let's see. So right now I'm at Apple. I'm doing full stack web development, and I'm also doing some like automated processing by the servers. And I'm working with the Tips app team. So Apple has an iOS app called Tips, and it's the icon is this little yellow light bulb, and it comes with all the new versions of iOS. And when you open it, it gives you advice on and instructions on how to use iPhone. And then if you have a watch, it'll also give you instructions on Apple Watch. And if you have an Apple TV, it'll also give you instructions on Apple TV. And so what I do is I'm not working on the app directly, but I'm working on all of their content tools. So I'm mostly writing in Python. I'm building like Django websites so we've got all these web pages that let the content teams create and edit content. So for example, you've got people writing these instructions, you've got people adding images and videos to the instructions, and then you also have people translating the instructions to different languages. So the app will have all the instructions in other languages depending on the language of your phone. I'm gonna try to dim this light in the hoop. I don't know if that makes the lighting better or worse. I feel like I'm really dark. But yeah, and then even the text on the images will get translated by translators. And then the other thing is that you'll get a different set of images depending on which iOS device you're using. So if you're on an iPad, you'll see a picture of an iPad. If you're on a newer iPad, you'll see a picture of a newer iPad. Stuff like that. So there's actually a lot of like complications in terms of what images go where and how the text looks and stuff. So there's a lot of tools that I'm building to help them out, to make it easier for them to write tips and edit the content and publish them and make sure that they look okay across a bunch of different devices. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing at Apple right now. I've been there for about a year, or a little bit over a year. I actually started off as sort of like a full-time contractor role, but then was converted to full-time software engineer. And I like it a lot. It's a really big company, but I still feel like I can have a huge impact if I'm doing my job well. And because the tools that I'm building are all used by people in Apple, I can talk to them to see what they want out of the tools, and hopefully make their jobs and lives easier. And they're really grateful whenever they get a new tool that makes their job easier. And then outside of work, I host this event called Wine and Hack, which is like a social event that happens about once every 2 months. We've had like 21 events over like 3 years, and it's 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 people coming over. Usually it's at my place, and I'll invite everybody I know to come over and hang out. And it's mostly people in tech, but not entirely. Um, it's called Wine and Hack because there's alcohol, but also there's people are encouraged to bring their laptops and like show off what they're working on or do some coding and stuff while you're there. It's sort of like it starts in the afternoon, and in the afternoon it's actually kind of quiet and people are actually working on their laptops. But then we have a potluck dinner and just sort of hang out afterwards. And it's a good way to meet people in tech. And it's been a lot of fun. It's definitely like my favorite thing to do. It's sort of it's taking a hiatus because of the coronavirus. We've done it once over Zoom, and that was pretty fun. We'll probably do it again over Zoom, maybe in a few weeks. But it's been really great because people appreciate being invited to stuff. I've even sort of advertised it, quote unquote, on Hackathon Hackers, which is this big Facebook group that has like a zillion members. And I say like, oh, I'll post something that says like, oh, if you're in the Silicon Valley area, come on over for a potluck dinner with a bunch of tech people. And so I think everybody should be trying to host events. It's a great way to meet people and network, but also, it just to make stuff happen. Because if you're just attending events, then you're at the mercy of whatever the community is doing. But if you're actually hosting events, then there'll be more stuff going on. And the other thing is, because I'm hosting the event, I get to design. I was inspired by hackathons in college. So I graduated from college like 8 years ago. In 2012, I graduated from University of Illinois. And back then we would have these hackathons where we'd like hang out and have pizza, and there'd be like maybe a competition to see who could make the coolest little computer app, or who could program the best like artificial intelligence for a computer game. And so I wanted to do something like that, and they've been pretty successful. Sometimes like 30 people will show up throughout the course of the afternoon and evening, and it'll be super fun. So that's the first piece of advice I can give you, is to try to throw events. And I'm sort of, I don't know who all is in the audience, but I'm sort of imagining that most of the people in the audience are younger people in tech. So I'm 30. So I'll try to give advice based on what I wish I had been told when I was younger and just getting started in tech. So the first thing is to throw events and to get involved in organizing events. Another thing is to like get involved with writing. I don't really have a blog per se, but I do like to write stuff, and I've found that can be really helpful. So for example, if you go, my website is kevinverre.com, but if you go to kevinverre.com/get, it'll redirect you to my GitHub sort of page. But within and in particular, I have several projects on Git, but the one that it redirects you to is my guide to Git. So I wrote, I don't know how many pages it is, let's say like 10 pages of information about how to use the Git software. So if you're not familiar with Git, it's a version control software, so you can keep track of the different versions of your files and collaborate on files. And it's notoriously hard to learn when you're first starting using it. And so I was actually using it and for years before I actually got good at it and understood it. So I wrote this guide for my friends and coworkers so that they could learn how to use Git better. But I actually found that the biggest benefit of writing the guide, it actually forced me to learn new stuff. Um, so it actually forced me to get even better than I was at the point when I decided to start writing it. Um, and so I feel like I've learned a lot by trying to teach others. And so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, that if you want to learn something, try writing about it and try explaining it to others, because that's when you're going to realize that there's all these questions that you don't know the answer to, and it's gonna motivate you to actually try to figure out the answers to those questions. And I remember this guide to Git. I actually started writing it on my phone. I was sitting at the DMV waiting in line for my turn at the DMV in California, and in Santa Clara, and so I had my phone with me and I just started writing, and so it turned out to be, um, and it turned out to be a really cool piece of writing. I think I'm really proud of how I was able to explain it, and I even included like a sort of reference section where I could stash little notes about different commands and look them up again if I had to. Um, and then another thing I want to talk about is to try to always be learning and like teaching yourself. So, software engineering is a very like knowledge heavy field, right? Like people are hiring you not just because you're able to sit in front of a computer and type stuff, but also because of what you know. And so it's very important to always try to be learning and always trying to be studying new things if you can. Um, when I first graduated college in 2012, I took a job at Simply Hired, and which is a website that simplyhired.com was a website that helped other people find jobs in any field. And I was doing mostly back-end server-side processes where I would write some code and it would process all this data that was coming through about job openings for the databases and for the search engine. And I was also doing some front-end web development, not for internal tools, but I didn't know a whole lot. And then I ended up taking like a class on Ruby on Rails through this company Block, and I think that helped me a lot because it taught me a lot of stuff that I didn't know at that point about front end web development and back end web development. And the more stuff that you know, the more you can offer to an employer. With the more that employers are going to be interested in you, the more opportunities you're going to have. So, from there, I was able to get a job at a really small startup doing Ruby on Rails. And I took that, it was called populi.com, and it was like this bookmarking website, kind of like Pinterest, where you're collecting things and making boards and sharing them, but it was for like links and bookmarks. And people used it as you could have boards that you could use as an alternative to the bookmarks in your browser, and then you could have public boards so you can share collections or comment on collections and log in with all your different devices and stuff. And so that was cool. And the reason why I joined that is at that time I really, really wanted to start my own startup someday. But it also sort of helped me realize how difficult it can be to start your own startup. So I didn't start Populi myself, but when I joined, there were already 3 people in the company, and they'd been working on it for like a year or several months, maybe a year or less. And I learned a lot about what it's like working at a startup. I learned a lot of good ideas of things that startups should be doing. I also learned a lot of bad ideas and mistakes that we made. I think, you need really, really good ideas and leadership and decisions. And one of the things that I think I learned a lot about is just like working with other people, and how much of you want to make your website or your app easy to use for whoever's going to use it, but everybody's going to have their own ideas, and so there was a lot of debate over the design and stuff. And so I think it's really important to have really, really good designers and really good leadership, who are willing to who are able to make really good design decisions. And then I joined I was at a couple other like smaller size companies before joining Apple. I don't recommend Ruby on Rails. Kids today probably don't even know what it is. But Ruby is a programming language, and Rails is the framework that they use to make apps on it. And it's not terrible. It's got a lot of really good things, but I think the Ruby programming language is so much more frustrating than the Python programming language, and the Rails framework is much more frustrating than the Django framework. So I like Python and Django a lot better than Ruby or Rails. And then, and so we get back. But how did I learn Python and Django, for example? Well, I bought a book on it. So there's some topics where buying a textbook or a book is going to be the best way to learn it. Sometimes the books aren't very good and the websites are really good. Other times the books are really good and the websites aren't really good. So there are topics where I bought the textbook and was disappointed with it, but found a really cool website to learn about that topic. And I try to always be studying at least one topic. One of the things I like to say is that if you have a goal, you should work on it a little bit every day. And there's a couple topics that I'm trying to learn right now, like getting better at Swift programming for iOS, and machine learning and statistics. And I'm not actually studying those every day, but I'm trying to, and I probably do it like every other day, where I'll spend some time reading from one of these books or from one of these websites. And it helps a ton, because the more you read and study about programming, the more you learn. And it's not just, sometimes it's not just what you find in the books or the websites. Sometimes what you read will inspire you to search on Google a question that you wouldn't have come up with otherwise if you hadn't been reading. And once all programming has a lot of similarities, right? Like there's like dozens of different areas within computer programming, but they're all computer programming, which means how can you get this machine to do what you want? How can, a computer is just a machine that follows instructions, and code is just instructions. So it's pretty easy to jump around from different areas of programming. Like it's not super duper easy. You're not going to go from, you're not going to become an expert at machine learning overnight, but the more you study it, eventually you'll pick up stuff. And so if you're the type of person who's like, oh, right now I'm only a backend programmer, or only a front end web, or only an iOS developer, or only a machine learning person, don't like sell yourself short. Like, you have, every person has tons of potential. Like, nobody's born being stuff. We're all pretty much like genetically equally good at any of these types of programming. Who's good at it is based on who's studied it the most and who's practiced it the most. So don't be afraid. And then, so like, don't be afraid to start learning something new. And it's okay to suck at something when you're new at it. I think the people that I see that are most successful at engineering or anything else are the people who aren't, they're not afraid to be terrible at something in the beginning and work through that terribleness until they get good. Another thing is that, like, nothing happens by magic, right? Like, computers can sometimes seem like magic. Like, I've got this phone, and at times it's magic because I can use it to play like any song. I can use it to talk to somebody on the other side of the world, or see them in live stream FaceTime video. And it feels like magic at times, but nothing in the universe happens by magic or by miracle. It's all just like science and stuff, and engineering. So just because something seems magic, it just means you haven't spent enough time studying it and trying to understand it, or trying to build it yourself. And if at first if the first 100 times you try to study something, you still feel like an idiot at it, that's okay. You can always keep trying again, and eventually you'll get it, right? So don't be discouraged just because the first 100 times you tried to learn something, it didn't click. Eventually you'll get the education that you need for it to click. And then so the next thing I wanted to talk about is like experience. Like, the experience helps you learn stuff, but experience, if it's not helping you learn something, or if it's not accomplishing a task, then experience is only so valuable, right? Like, for I'll give you an example. Like, if or let me put it this way: nobody's going to hire you for your experience, right? Because people don't care. People don't hire somebody to do something because of what they've done in the past. They hire people because they want what they can do for them in the present and in the future. So if you're like, just imagine that you're like the world's greatest, most experienced engineer. Nobody's going to hire you if you're dead, right? Because if you're dead, you can't do anything for anybody. So so all that experience isn't doing you any good. What companies are looking for is people who can provide a lot of value to the company. And experience can be useful for that, because if you have a lot of experience, you probably know some stuff, and you probably have a lot of good ideas. You're probably able to shoot down bad ideas. You're probably better able to notice inefficiencies in the code or fix bugs in the code. But just getting lots of experience, if you're doing the same thing over and over again, you're technically getting more experience, but you're not growing your value to other people. And working a job is all about how much value can you provide to other people. And it's also a marketplace, right? You're competing against other software engineers for jobs and stuff. So, for example, software engineers tend to get paid pretty well. And it's partly because software companies tend to generate a lot of money, because consumers and businesses are willing to spend a lot of money on software, and that allows software engineers to get paid well. But that's only half of the equation, right? That's like the demand side of the equation. There's also the supply side of the equation, in terms of there's a limited number of software engineers. If everybody was super good at software engineering, then businesses wouldn't have to pay software engineers as much, no matter how profitable the business is, because they would have more supply of labor that they could choose from. And if so that's why it's really important to always be learning and growing your skills, and not just gaining experience, because it's really easy to fall into this trap of you're good at what you do, but you're not getting better at all these other things that you can't do. And that can be a problem for people, because the software industry changes so quickly. Computers haven't been around for all that while compared to other things like farming. And which means that the tech and the software industry and the hardware industry are changing incredibly fast. So 10 years ago, somebody doing Ruby on Rails might have been extremely valuable. But now, now the technology's changed. It's the same with back in the day, you would write JavaScript, and now you still write JavaScript, but you've got all these libraries like jQuery and React that give you features that the original JavaScript didn't have. So if you're not learning new skills, you might find yourself in a situation where your opportunities for work are limited by your skill set. And anyone have any questions yet? Feel free to ask questions. I can see the chat and stuff. So let's see. We got a question. Let me read it first. Okay, so the question from Phoebe was, hey, I'm a backend developer. I know a little bit about front-end development, but not very much confidence. How good should you be to be in front end to be a full stack? I would say just, my first thought is like anybody's, if you know any front end, then you're good enough to be a full stack. The real question is, are you good enough to get hired? So if somebody is looking for, if a team is looking for a full stack software engineer and they know they're going to have a lot of front end work, they might choose somebody else instead of you who has more front end experience. But the more you practice front end development, the better you get it, the better you're going to get at it. Spend some time reading. Any time you spend reading books or web pages or blogs or documentation, that stuff's all gonna pay dividends down the road. So I think you can build a lot of really cool web pages and tools using minimal front end skills, right? So like, if you're building a tool that's an internal tool that somebody inside the company is going to see, but the customer isn't going to see, it doesn't need to be super pretty. It just needs to be able to do a job really well and make the lives of the other people around you easier. So you don't need a ton of front end work. The other thing is, you can be clever about it. Like, just because you don't know all the fancy front end stuff doesn't mean you can't build a good front end if you're because you can be clever about it, and you can sometimes clever yourself into cool solutions that actually work really well. The other thing is that people tend to uh, if there's that old saying, if all you have is a hammer, then everything becomes a nail. People who are really good at let's say you're really good at front end React programming, but you're less confident on the back end side. So this is the opposite of the person asking a question. In that case, you might choose to rely on front end tech more than is ideal. So I've seen websites and tools where it was obvious that the person was like a JavaScript developer, and they did everything on the front end and the browser side, and they did things that should have been done on the back end side, and it makes the whole app and architecture more confusing and buggy. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's like this trend nowadays to do what's called a single page web app. And the idea is that the browser is sending requests to the server to pull in information, but they're not refreshing the entire page. They're not building the page from scratch. Instead of loading an entire page, you're just sending bits of information, and you're sort of plugging that into the page. And that's really good for some consumer applications. Like Facebook has a ton of JavaScript that allows a bunch of things to happen without the whole page having to be refreshed. But I've also seen it used too much, where somebody tried to build a single page app when the code would have been much simpler and less buggy and cleaner and easier to understand if they had built it across several pages. So and then if you're only a backend engineer, some of your some of your applications where you're building forms and stuff, or might be more confusing because there's certain logic and stuff that you can put into the front end that might make more sense and be more intuitive and be less buggy and easier to manage. So I don't think there's like any amount of how good you should be to be a full stack. You can just be even if you're terrible at front end, you can just be a full stack engineer who is good at back end and terrible at front end, and then go from there. So we got another question that says, I'm not sure if I want to pursue engineering or consulting. Do you have any advice? I've never really worked as a consultant. I've always worked as a software engineer working for a company. And however, I do know some people who work as software engineering consultants, and they really like it. But I've never tried it myself. There are certain companies. I'm blanking on the name, but there's a couple big companies who they have a bunch of software engineers, and then they sort of sell those skills and knowledge to other companies via consulting. So yeah, I mean, I would say try it, and try both and see what you like better. I think there's probably advantages and disadvantages to both. The and so yeah, a lot of companies will hire some companies will build out a lot of code in-house with their own software engineers, and other companies will just want to pay a bunch of money to get somebody else to code it for them. So it's definitely an option. And so someone else wrote, I'm currently an MBA student and want to break into tech. What is the first step of building my portfolio, or do you have any resume advice? So I would say, start by building small websites that do simple tasks. Maybe like a simple front end or a simple back end, or maybe a simple app. And just there's all these guides online if you just search Google on what it is that you want to build. So like, what if you want to break into tech, you need to be educated so that when somebody asks you to build this thing, you're able to build it. Or if somebody comes to this question about why something isn't working, you're able to answer their question. As far as resume advice, that's like its whole own topic. Don't be afraid to list something on your resume, even if you don't think it's super relevant. Maybe somebody will make fun of you for having it on there, but you never know what will come in handy. Like when I was just getting started in tech, I didn't have any programming. I had a little bit of programming experience, but I didn't have any paid jobs yet. So I put on my resume that I drew comic strips in high school, and somebody actually saw that and gave me a job writing code, because they thought, oh, maybe this person, because they were good at drawing comics, maybe they have like good design skills, and the code they needed was aimed. The code they wanted was aimed. Their target customer was artists and designers. So so it's kind of this like weird coincidence. So one way you can use your resume is to try to just like throw stuff out there and hope that by weird coincidence it helps you. Someone asks in the chat, programming language I should invest my time in. I would say Python, JavaScript are really good. Swift is really good if you want to get into iOS app development. You can make good money doing iOS app development. Those are the ones I would focus on if I was getting started right now. Java feels like old-fashioned. Like there's still a ton of jobs that are looking for Java engineers or C++ engineers, but I love Python. I think JavaScript's okay. I think I love writing Python a lot more than I like writing JavaScript, just because of the syntax and stuff. But I think the most important thing is to just keep practicing whatever language you're best at. Keep practicing, and then keep practicing new languages, because no language is going to last forever. There's always going to be newer stuff being made to so just don't eventually you get to a point where you've programmed in so many languages that it's no longer scary to start programming in some other language, because all languages are basically just programming languages. So let's see. So like, when I was in college, I used ActionScript, and most of the kids today don't even know what ActionScript is. It was a type of JavaScript-like language, and it was made by Adobe, and it was used for Flash games and Flash advertisements, and like also, but then they also tried to make Adobe made something called Adobe Flex, which was like Flash for web apps. So the idea was like, oh, this was like before iOS apps were a thing, or were a popular thing. So there's like, oh, you'd build an app in ActionScript, and then it'd run on Windows and Mac and Linux. But nobody uses it anymore, but it was still a really cool language. And it'll always have a place in my heart because of the cool stuff I was able to build with it. But in the long run, even though nobody uses it, nobody hires ActionScript developers anymore. It was still a good experience learning it because I learned a lot. Next question from the chat. I'm a React JavaScript developer, and I want to transition to full stack web developer. Do you have any advice where to start? So there's two places that come to mind. The first is Django, because I love Django. You have to use Python, but if you get a book on Django, I'm going to grab this book off the shelf because I love this book so much. This is called Django for Beginners, and it just teaches you how to build websites. I'd already used Ruby on Rails a lot, which is similar. But the other thing, if you're not interested in learning Python and Django, then the other obvious place to start would be Node.js, and Express.js is like an extension on top of Node that adds more features. So Node by itself is designed to be like very lightweight and simple, which means it's easy to understand and it's easy to get started. But once you start building more complicated websites, there's a bunch of things that are going to become tedious if you have to write them all yourself. So you install Express and it gives you some other good classes and functions and stuff, similar to that Django or Rails would have. And then you have to learn. You have to learn how to use these libraries and their functions and their classes, but they generally have so many features that it's worth it to learn these other libraries rather than, it's tempting to just like program everything yourself, and that way you don't have to learn somebody else's library. But some libraries are actually designed in a way that's pretty easy to use, or maybe not terrible to use. And if you just learn that, you can save time rather than building it yourself. Let's see. The next question is, I'm planning to build my own website, but I'm torn on where to start. Build it from scratch or use a CMS like WordPress? I would say try both and see what you like better. If you build something in WordPress, it's going to give you a lot of features, and you can build a really pretty website and a really powerful website just using WordPress. But you're not going to learn as much about how the lower level stuff works than if you build it yourself. So if you for example, I have several websites that I own the domain for. So you can just I use a company called Namecheap to buy all my domain names, and then you pay for like a year to get the domain name, and it's like $10 or whatever. And then what I do is I hook these. I use GitHub to actually host some of the websites, and GitHub will actually let you host websites for free. You just have to go into your domain managing, whatever company bought your domain from. They'll have a way to set up the IP addresses and stuff and the DNS records to point to GitHub. And then what you can do is GitHub won't let you have a backend, but it'll let you have a front end. And so you can have HTML, JavaScript, and images on your GitHub. And so if you go to like kevinverre.com, that's just behind the scenes. There's no server powering it. There is a server powering it, but it's just seeing requests for files, and it's serving those files. It's not actually running any code to serve those files. It's not doing any like backend code. So you can actually, I also use Bootstrap a lot as like a way to make, if you can make a pretty decent looking website just using Bootstrap, like it's not going to look amazing, but there and there's a lot of frustrating parts of using Bootstrap, but there's also a lot of really cool parts of using Bootstrap to and Bootstrap, if you don't know, is a library for CSS and JavaScript that you can use on your web front end to build all the different common pieces of a website. So WordPress is really good if you just want to focus on the content, like maybe you're writing about something, like you have a blog or something. But you can also try to figure out what WordPress is doing, or you can add your own custom code to the WordPress. So I would just say start anywhere and explore. So Elizabeth asks in the chat, how do you decide to use Flask or Django? I like Django a lot. Flask is, I've never actually really used it. I think it's good if you had like a really small project and you wanted like a really lightweight thing. But I would just use Django for everything, unless it was like a really like what do you need to be, unless you like really need something to be lightweight for some reason. I like Django, but some people love Flask. To me, Flask is more like Node.js by itself, where it feels like it doesn't have as many features that I would want. What programming stack do you recommend for beginners who wish to go into full stack? I really love Django and Python. I'd actually never really used it much before like a year and a half ago. But what it allows you to do is you spend less time fighting it and trying to figure out what's going wrong, and you spend less time because like Python is pretty simple to understand how the imports and stuff work, and yeah, I felt like Django was pretty fast for me to learn, but I'd also come from a background of Ruby and Rails, which so I knew a lot about some of the, I had an understanding of some of the features of Django and why they had those features and why they were designed the way they were. So like, for example, you might learn about how to, for example, let's take databases as an example. If you're learning about databases, you're going to learn how to create a table, add rows to a table, add columns to a table, stuff like that. And then Rails and Django and Express are going to give you functions, which are like, okay, now, if you didn't have a migration, you could still open up your database software and type in the command that adds a new table or adds a new row or adds a new column. Let's say column, because most of the times you don't use migrations for rows. You're using it to add a new table or to add a new column. But now if you put it in a migration file, now you've got this record of what changes you made to the database structure. And then you can write the migration in such a way that you can undo it. If you ever had to undo a migration, you could. And so there's all this cool stuff you can do with databases using these libraries. And then, of course, like Django and all these other ones, they'll have their own libraries for interacting with the database, so that you don't have to write raw SQL. Like I almost never write raw SQL. Although there are definitely times if you're doing something complicated, I would probably rather you write raw SQL than try to use the library to do something complicated. But Django's library for interacting with databases is pretty straightforward, so that you can do powerful stuff without feeling like you're writing a ton of confusing code. Because at the end of the day, that's really what you want, is you want code that you feel like, oh, I'm confident that this works, that if changes need to be made, they can be made easily and quickly without breaking stuff. And if you have really complicated code, then like with Ruby on Rails, it was very easy to accidentally end up with really complicated code, and then that code would be very brittle, and it'd be hard to make changes when you want to redesign how your app works. So someone asks, how good should you be in security as a full stack developer? That's a good question. The more experience you have as a full stack developer, the better you'll get at security. For example, the other thing is, like, usually when you're just starting out, you're spending most of your time working on the code and not as much of your time deploying the code. So like if you're a beginner engineer, there's probably somebody else deploying the code. Like at my current job at Apple, I've got a server that I can go and I can deploy code to anytime I want, because everybody using that server is an internal Apple employee. I'm not, but it also means I get a lot of understanding of all of the sort of the server layer. Like you sort of think of it as there's your application layer, which is the Django app, and then there's the server layer, which could be like Nginx or Apache, and they'll and then for example, like you can use HTTPS to make your website more secure and more private. But that can be that was really confusing at first too. I think it's good to read about security. What if you have good logging on your server, then that can help make your website more secure, because if you can see the logs and see what happened or see what's going on. If you're using something like Heroku to host your web app, they're going to have services that you can pay extra for to try to make your website even more secure. There's all that, I think, I don't know. It's an interesting topic, because it can be really hard sometimes to see what is a legitimate request. Like sometimes you'll see weird stuff in the logs, and you're not sure if it's because somebody was doing something that they shouldn't be able to do, or if you just didn't configure something correctly. So at first you get your website working and then try to make it as secure as possible. There's obvious stuff you'll learn, like you shouldn't be storing passwords in as plain text. Like the most basic thing you can do is to store a password as a hash in a database, and if you use one of these web frameworks. They're going to have libraries for creating user accounts and passwords that'll hopefully do things a little bit more securely. But yeah, if you have, a lot of security is just like Googling the error messages and the log messages that you see and seeing what other people think it means. But yeah, I think I covered a lot. Are there any other questions you guys have? Do you want me to keep talking about random stuff and random pieces of advice, or?
Hey, Kevin, I have a question. Hello.
Yeah.
So my question is like, with a lot of people that are early in their career, what is it that they do wrong usually that makes them struggle to proceed on with their career?
Yeah. Okay, that's a good idea. The first thing that came to mind is not communicate enough. I feel like I was really shy when I was first starting out my career. So there's a tendency to like when you're first starting out, there's a tendency to not send many emails or not send many instant messages because you don't want to feel like you're bugging people. But the more you talk about stuff, the more you can find problems and the more you can figure out stuff faster, and the more you can get a better understanding of what the software is doing and what's challenging about it. So that's the first thing that came to mind, is just communicate more. Ask lots of questions, file lots of bug reports, and send out lots of emails, send out lots of messages on Slack or whatever instant messenger you use. Let's see, what else? Another thing is don't be afraid to sort of reframe the problem. So I'll give you an example of like, there's sometimes in software engineering, you're gonna encounter what I call like a Rube Goldberg machine, which is a complicated machine that's way more complicated than necessary. And so if somebody asks you, so this was something I encountered early on in my programming career. Someone's like, I want you to write me a script that takes X and turns it into Y. But what that might not actually be the best thing to give them, because what I actually found is the reason they wanted to go to X from Y is because they already had this really complicated system in place to go from A to B to C to X, and now they wanted to go to Y. If I had just given them a script that went from A to Y, then I could skip all these steps in the middle that were making it more confusing. They were like, oh, I asked, a lot of times when you're a software engineer, you're working with non-software engineers. You're building software for non-software engineers. So this woman, her workflow was like, oh, I go to this one website, I hit this button, downloads it into an Excel spreadsheet. I open up Excel, I edit the values, I import it into this other website, and all these other like complicated steps. When what she really wanted was just like a simple tool to edit the data in the database. Like a simple form that I can give you. So so that's the second thing I thought of, is like reframing the problem, because sometimes people will ask for a solution that fits their, how they see the problem rather than what the real underlying problem is. And it's very easy to get complicated and messy and brittle and code that has lots of bugs because you're going about it in a very complicated way. Another thing that young people, so I mentioned I mentioned education a lot. So I definitely, when I first started my career, I definitely did not study as much outside of work as I do now, and so I regret that because I think the more you study outside of work, the quicker you're going to learn, and the more valuable stuff you're going to learn. I don't know. Those are the first few things that come to mind. If anyone else has any other answers, feel free to jump in to suggest your own ideas. But good question. Thanks for asking.
I have a question.
Sure. What's up?
First of all, thank you for doing this. I'm one of the founders of the Fiesta app.
Yeah.
And again, really insightful. Everything that you talked about. Just would love to hear your thoughts on what you think of sort of the Fiesta platform, where you have obviously like marketplace events combined with video conferencing, combined with like there's some social media elements, so kind of like Eventbrite combined with Zoom, with like Instagram, TikTok. Obviously, there's still a lot of functionality that we're building, but what do you think of the platform? And is there something that you're like, oh man, if it only had these couple other things, it'd be so much better?
Yeah. Great question. So let's see. Yeah, my first when I first saw it, I thought Eventbrite combined with Zoom.
Okay.
How I would describe it with people. I don't have any complaints with it so far. I haven't used it a whole lot, other than giving this talk and watching my friend give his talk last weekend. Yeah, I think I think to view a talk you have to be signed in. I think is that a true statement? To view, somebody can't like view this talk as a guest.
We are actually adding that next week. So there is a live stream already, but you just have to log in for now. But you people will be able to watch it without logging in. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's one thing I noticed. Like,
okay,
if I wanted to share this link to my parents or whatever, they're probably not gonna care enough or wanna log in.
Okay.
But they want to be able to watch. No, that's the only thing that came to mind. I'm happy with it. I mean, it seems to be working. So
from a like gamifying the platform, is there something? And I don't know how much you've done in terms of sort of gamifying or like sort of referral system. Is there something that you'd because one of the things that we're trying to work on right now is how do we incentivize, like what you said, like how do we incentivize, like for example, the attendees. Right now we have there's 31 people on the platform. How do we get at least 20 of them to like invite somebody else? Do you have some thoughts on sort of gamifying or like sort of like a referral system? A little bit like obviously one of the ones that have worked really well with like the Uber referral system. They have the rider referral system, and then they have the driver referral system. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's interesting because I'm not usually like a content creator. Like I don't have like a YouTube channel. Other than for like piano videos. I don't have like a Twitch live stream. I love, so I was invited by the TechOpps people, and so that really made it nice for me, is that they could sort of handle everything. They just said, hey Kevin, you want to give a talk? And I was like, sure.
Right.
And then they said sign up with Fiesta app. So they that way I didn't have to worry about setting up my own channel. I'm just on their channel. I would love, hopefully other people give talks on Fiesta app someday too on their channels and stuff, or maybe I'll want to obviously it's cool that it's got a good live streaming chatting. I can read the questions, so that makes it more fun than if I was just talking into a YouTube video and pre-recording it.
But for example, for like, because I know you talked about your event, wine and
wine and hack,
right? So is there like one or two kind of sort of things that you're like, oh, like if I had this, it would make it easier for me to get a bigger audience? I don't know right now. Are you using Eventbrite and Zoom, or are you just using Zoom?
Yeah, so I've done wine and hack over Zoom. I mean, originally it was like an in-person event. It's only because of the coronavirus that we would do it online. And although when I was doing it in person, I would sometimes have people ask that I live stream the events or something, or have some way to participate in the party sort of without actually being there.
Okay.
But I never actually did it.
Mm.
You know, the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, with Zoom, I can just send everybody a link and they can pretty easily figure out how to do it. They've heard the Zoom name so many times.
Right.
They're not afraid to install it or to sign up or whatever you need to do to get started.
Mm-hmm.
So if I send somebody a link to Fiesta app, say, hey, come to my event, they might, because they're not as familiar with Fiesta app as Zoom, they might be less likely to um, sign up and stuff.
Right. Okay.
So anything that, so I think you guys did a pretty good job of making it like not seem. You want to avoid making it seem sketchy, right? Like,
Right.
So you want to make the website look as professional as possible. So, and I think you guys did a good job of doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. No, thank you so much for that feedback.
Yeah, thanks for stopping by.
To get feedback on what we're doing and things we can improve. But thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions before I go about their advice for their tech career? If not, let's see. I've been talking for a good time. So yeah, I definitely would love to do something like this again. Thanks for inviting me, TechOpps, to talk on your Fiesta app channel and on your Facebook page and stuff like that.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here, Kevin.
Happy to have you. Thank you. Thank you. It was a really good talk. It was great.
No, it was super fun. I love talking about stuff. I could go on and on about all these crazy things that have happened. But the other thing I was gonna say is the better you get at programming, the more fun it is, because the more you can build and the easier it is to build stuff, and the more job opportunities you have, and the more people are impressed by you, and the more, the better you get, the more people like your work and like working with you. And that's what makes it fun, is when people really like your work. So it's a book I read called So Good They Can't Ignore You. And one of the things the book said is that the people who are happiest with their jobs aren't necessarily the people who are in fields that are really happy, but they're people that are doing a really good job in their field. And, so in sports, there's sort of a saying that like winning cures everything. So I think, if you're feeling, because there were a lot of times when I was younger when I thought about like quitting software engineering and finding something else to do with my life. But I'm glad I didn't, because there's a ton of cool stuff you can build with software and hardware. And, there's a ton of cool problems to solve that companies have. The more you learn and the better you get, the more motivated you are. It's something I was going to say that I didn't write down is if you want motivation, the best way to get motivation to do something is to start doing it. So if you wish you had more motivation to learn more front end or more back end web stuff or more iOS stuff, then the more time you spend learning it, the more you're going to be motivated to learn it. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So yeah, so that's all that I have.
All right. If nobody has any more questions for Kevin over here, we would like to thank Kevin again for coming to the show. Thank you everyone for coming to the show as well. So yeah, that's it for today's episode of Tech Talks. Thank you, Kevin, for coming. It's been a real pleasure.
Yep. So, thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Goodbye,
Kevin.
everybody.
Goodbye,
Goodbye.
everyone.
See you, Kevin. Bye. Oh yeah. By the way, sorry. Can we connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Let me. So we saw my website. I'll put my website again. Let me see my. Let me just double check to make sure that this actually goes to my profile before I send it to you.
All right, sure thing.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I got. Here we go. So yeah, I just double checked that that is in fact my LinkedIn address. So yeah, and I'll even throw out my. If you want to message me on Facebook, let's see. Yeah, there you go. My message me on Facebook. That's a pretty easy way to reach me. So okay, talk to you guys later. Bye.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
Kevin. Goodbye.
Coming. Thanks for. Thank you.